Well, this is Pellowe Talk Live, the overtime episode where we have Lyle Shelton joining us back again, and the other guests will be joining us. We've got Kurt Mahlburg joining us right now. George Christensen was with us earlier tonight, but his internet connection isn't so good in the parliamentary offices in Canberra. Good of him to be joining us from work while he's away, and I do believe that Malcolm Turnbull's NBN has finally reached Mackay. So we may have good internet from him the next time he's joining the show, not in Canberra. But, welcome back, and Lyle, and I hope Debbie's not too far away as well. Now, Lyle, have you got any more thoughts on adoption? Somebody suggested before in comments that we need to extend legal personhood to children in the womb. Is that politically possible?
Well, that's a different question to adoption, obviously, but it's an important question. I think it's not only legally possible, but it's a legal imperative because a human person begins at conception. That's when life starts and that development begins, and personhood should be acknowledged from that moment legally. The fact that there are no human rights for someone 5 minutes before birth or 5 hours or 5 weeks or 5 months is a travesty, and I just think it's the greatest social injustice. And I'd encourage everyone to watch the last few minutes of the actual show of Debbie's incredible insights into this whole issue of abortion and adoption and the way mothers bond with their unborn babies, or the way that babies bond with their mothers. Those were incredible insights. And her thoughts there about adoption, I think, is something that all of us in the pro-life community need to think really hard about.
Yep. Kurt, have you got any thoughts on adoption, just the issue generally? I know adoption laws vary from state to state, but as Debbie said, one of the things that's remarkably true about Australia is that we have an incredibly low adoption rate. Is it that parents in Australia don't want to adopt? Is there a stigma attached to it? Or what do you think is the obstacle to people adopting in various states in Australia?
I've got a lot of friends actually who talk about adoption in very favourable terms and would certainly consider adopting. So I would think, I guess I move in Christian circles a lot, so maybe that's not representative of all of Australia, but I would think it's probably not so much that. My other impression is that adoption is a very expensive and laborious process to go through. So I think if anything, that's possibly what's preventing it. So.
Debbie, I don't know if you just heard Kurt's comment there, but he mentioned that adoption in Australia is prohibitively expensive for most people. Maybe the very rich, well-to-do can afford it, but is that a problem that needs fixing? And if so, have you got any ideas on how we would fix the financial cost of adopting a child domestically in Australia?
I am not so sure adoption is hugely expensive in Australia for domestic adoption. We don't have private adoption like they do in the United States, for example, where it's really become quite an industry. And adoption there is very much about finding babies for couples who want them, rather than meeting the needs of babies or meeting the needs of mothers. Here we've got very highly regulated adoption, and adoption from overseas is very expensive because it necessitates, a lot of overseas travel. There are lots of issues involved there. I would not be, I don't want to be talking about making adoption easier.
Right.
I want to be talking about getting rid of adoption. Basically, sure, there are some children who cannot live in their families for a whole number of reasons. That is not a reason, though, for us to have to practice adoption as we currently do it, and that is to erase a child's identity, put them in a family as though they are born to that family, and sever their legal linkages to their biological family. We can provide ways for children to be raised in safe, loving, permanent homes without doing those things. What those things do, erasing a child's identity and producing a new birth certificate that says actually these people conceived and gave birth to you, which is basically what we're saying, meets the needs of adults. It doesn't meet the need of a child. And therein lies a lot of my issue around lots of these reproductive issues, which includes adoption, is that we're focusing on the needs of adults, not on the needs of children in those settings. In the United States, we see a lot of GoFundMe campaigns, for example, from couples who are wanting to adopt, and they need to raise $30,000 in order to adopt their next baby. That money does not go to the mother. It goes to solicitors and lawyers and lots of middlemen and organisations who sit in the middle, over there with privatised adoption. But we also know that there are some wonderful grassroots organisations in the United States run by people who've been affected by adoption. One is called Saving Our Sisters. Now, they say it costs around $1,000 to meet the needs of a woman so she doesn't have to give up her baby for adoption. So we've got these people raising tens of thousands of dollars to procure a child from someone else whose needs could be met with substantially less than that to get them over those early hiccups and through that time that is so difficult in order for them to be able to parent their child in a supported way. So we're doing it wrong. When we do it the other way, we're talking about, it, and sure, it is sad when a woman cannot have a baby and really wants a child, that it does not entitle her to someone else's child.
Challenging statements there, and I'm intrigued, and I want to learn more, and I want to let you persuade me on a lot of what you've said, but I remain unpersuaded on a lot of what you've said. I definitely do want to have dominant conversations about how we can support women who are pregnant, who are struggling and feel like they have no choice other than to terminate the life of their child. I think that's a horrible failure of society and government. It's an indictment on our government that there's only funding and support and promotion of killing innocent living humans. I think that's a travesty.
Could I just ask a point of clarification of Debbie? I've been really interested and fascinated by what you've been saying, Debbie, both in the last show and now in this Overflow show, because like a typical pro-lifer, I was one who always thought, adoption's got to be the answer, or at least a part of the answer when there's 100,000 abortions per year. Surely a significant percentage of those babies could be perhaps offered for adoption if for whatever reason women were unable to raise that child. But what I think I'm hearing you say is that you're not necessarily against the idea of a child being rehomed. It's the erasure of their identity, and perhaps the way to approach it is to not necessarily say no to what we would call adoption, but to do it in a way where the child still retains their identity and grows up knowing the truth about his or her conception, but nevertheless is rehomed, and that's part of the solution.
I think that if it has to be done, it needs to be done in a different way that maintains their biological ties and their identity. However, it only needs to be done as a very last resort as well. I think that we need to do everything we possibly can to keep mothers and babies together. And look, part of it is that there is what I think is a well-intentioned but maybe misinformed values system for many people and I've heard people say these words, that if a woman has considered abortion, she doesn't really want her baby or she's not worthy of having her baby. And that's something that underlies things. I've heard people say, well, of course, teenagers make terrible mothers and they shouldn't be raising their babies. They shouldn't have abortions, and we should be making sure their babies are adopted. Now, I have strong views about that. I had my first baby at 17. She's sitting in the next room. She's a mother of 4 children. No one could ever convince me that anyone could be a better mother to her than I was. I am connected to my children in a way that I would have even if they'd gone to another home. And that's what I hear from every woman who's lost a child to adoption. They never stop yearning. And the research tells us that a woman who's lost a child to adoption, grief tends to get greater, not lesser, over time.
Interesting.
It's not something that they heal from in that way, and it's not something that's necessarily overcome by what we call reunion, because a woman is wanting to hold her baby, and she meets a grown man or a grown woman who is a completely different person than any other person who grew up in their family. They might not have the same values, or, they look different. So there's a whole host of issues there. And the other thing, we have to listen to adult adoptees. They're so marginalised out of the debate. There's a great organisation called Adoptee Rights Australia, and they're adult people who were adopted, who just want their identity back, and they want the same rights as everyone else. They watch people who, we have legislation now that says to 16-year-olds they can change their gender, by signing a statutory declaration. These are adults who want to say, I want to undo the contract that traded me from one family to another by the signing of documentation, but I'm not allowed to. I can't even say I want to belong back into my other family without having to go through lots of hoops and court proceedings and then maybe get it done. So we're not listening to them. And the language that we use around adoption is very, very manipulative. Adopted people grow up with often being told things like how lucky they are. Now, can you imagine growing up being told, well, you're so lucky you were adopted into this family, your mother might have aborted you, so you're kind of lucky to be alive. Why? That's really kind of negative messaging. There's then this whole conflicted loyalties issue, that they don't want to hurt adopted parents who they may well love hugely. They want their mother, who in their minds abandoned them. However, she may also have been coerced. There's all sorts of reasons why she may have lost. So it's a very, very conflicting, trauma-filled area. And if we are going to have adoption in any form, it needs to only be in the most dire of circumstances, and done in such a way that it doesn't erase identity, allows people to maintain their biological connections and even see their parents. Maybe a woman can't raise her own baby because she has drug problems or alcohol problems or mental health issues and doesn't feel she can do it, and thinks, and she may even think in other families can raise her child in a more effective way and a more resourced way. That doesn't mean she shouldn't be in her child's life. It doesn't mean the child has no right to know her, not just have letters exchanged 4 times a year or visits dictated by adopted parents, but they have the right to know where they come from and know and be loved by their parents.
Debbie, I want to move on to other topics, just so we don't go for another hour, but you and I will go for another hour. So I want to encourage viewers that want more on this topic. Subscribe to my channels at Pellowe Talk on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and of course email updates on my website, davepellowe.com. Here's the details. And we're going to get into this in detail. One of the questions I don't want you to answer right now, Debbie, but I'm going to ask Debbie, is what about children that are bounced around foster care homes in a very abusive childhood? And that kind of situation is just untenable. To me, it seems like adoption is a very necessary positive in that. So I'm sure there's lots more questions. There's heaps that I agree with in what Debbie's saying. But let's make sure you are subscribing to my newsletters and on the various social media channels, so you can get that conversation, which will be posted within a week. So, yeah. Steve, let's have a chat about Queensland politics. We're not far away from an election, less than 6 months to go now. And Alan Jones has stepped down from radio, but Jackie Trad has stepped down from her portfolio as treasurer, and for whatever that seems to have been doing for the state. I'm not exactly sure. Everything's a lot different now. But she stepped down as Deputy Premier following an announcement of an investigation into allegations of corruption by her. How has this affected the outcome? Is this exactly what the opposition leader Frecklington was looking for, or is this now made less of a target for Labor, do you think?
Great questions. Oh boy. Okay. So often I talk about the late Terry McEnroth, and I would say now that Terry McEnroth would be a very happy man where he's resting. I think they have had a recalibration, a circuit breaker, everything that could possibly have gone right for them in making this happen has happened. The ex-premier has basically just disappeared off the centre stage, and in place you've had a very media presentable duo of Kate Jones and Cameron Dick. There has always been talk that if the ex-premier and the current premier were to move centre stage and go off stage, that Jones and Dick would be the new deputy sheriff and sheriff in town. They apparently present well in the media. They are articulate. They speak well, and in terms of being able to get messaging, they seem to be able to put out the message that they want. Whether or not that's an accurate or good message for the state of Queensland is up for the voters to decide. One thing that's still not being discussed, but that'll be something that will be discussed, I suppose you can look at it, is an economic analysis of Queensland and in COVID-19, the freedoms of Queensland. So we fundamentally talk about the freedom of assembly, freedom of association, and we also look at the non-sitting of our parliament. So earlier tonight we had a guest on, George, who's a member for Dawson, is going back to his workplace, the federal parliament. We have the Brisbane City Council able to sit in its workplace, the City Hall, but at the moment Queensland State Parliament is unable to sit in its workplace, which is the State Parliament there on George Street. So very interesting times, David. I think for the Premier, it's been a good 48 hours. I think the noose and goose that was around her neck has literally disappeared. It'd be interesting to see what happens in the next weeks and months going forward as to what the investigation uncovers. If nothing was uncovered, then would that give the current member of South Brisbane the ability to be parachuted back in to her positions? Because you do have to give everyone the presumption of innocence. We are based on that country. That's the whole basis of what we're about from our justice system. She has done nothing wrong. She has something to answer for according to what's been written in the media. So we have to give that whole process its complete opportunity to run its course. But if it is to be found that she had done nothing wrong or has done nothing wrong, then what an interesting conversation that could be. Yep. As the Labor Party would then say, well, she's back in. Yep. That could be a cracking time period for all the Australian newspapers to watch.
Lyle, what do you think of this as it affects? Do you think it's going to have any effect on the election at all? That Queensland's Chief Health Officer has now said flu vaccinations are going to be mandatory if you want to play elite sport in the nation, in the state.
I don't know what effect that might have on the election, Dave, but this debate over vaccinations is a very vexed one, and you've got a number of high-profile footballers and their wives or girlfriends coming out as anti-vaxxers, to use that term. So I think this is a debate that's not going to go away. I don't know whether the health officer's decision will impact on the election, but I just think it means that this debate will continue to get hotter and hotter.
And we had Mark Latham chipping in. The dictatorship of health bureaucrat continues to grow. 3 NRL players stood down over flu jab refusal by Queensland government. One of these players, Nathan Peat, says he's not against vaccination per se, but he had a bad experience with flu jab in 2012, one of many. He also makes the point that this has nothing to do with coronavirus. So, yeah, Kurt, what do you think? Do you even follow NRL at all? I got you.
NRL? Yeah, no, look, I think I'm not, I don't have any problems with vaccinations myself, but I do think
just to answer that question, NRL is the game Port Adelaide couldn't be good enough to play for.
Well, I'm a Crows man, so that's fine. But yeah, I mean, I don't have any problems with vaccinations myself, but the idea that you're barred from a state if you won't get them, barred from elite sport in a state if you don't get them, I think I think that's pretty crazy.
Do you think we're staring down the barrel of a government like Queensland, which has no upper house, saying that all public servants, for example, if you're a teacher in a public school, then you have to have the flu vaccination of all things before you're allowed to earn a living as a public servant?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of questions we've got to start asking about our freedoms. The last 2 months has been pretty scary, seeing the sorts of expectations and restrictions that have been imposed on us. So I think it's time to start sort of standing up and talking back.
Yep. And Steve, you were going to chip in with something there on compulsory vaccinations for public servants.
Yes, David. I'm very interested about the chief medical officers across the states and territories and the politicians. Everyone in this photo frame tonight, and all the viewers in that, they voted for their politicians to make legislative decisions. And the chief medical officers are a componentry of the public service that advise into government, advise into the elected officials. The elected officials, the members of parliament, are the decision makers who listen to advice. Now, they might get advice from 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they sit down and they make the decision. Imagine if we were going to war and we only followed the advice of the defence, the chief of the defence forces, one person. Now, would we do what the chief of the defence forces said, or would the prime minister, and I emphasise that word, prime, meaning the number one, the number one elected official of the land, ultimately in the Commonwealth of Australia, has always made the, in big capital letters, decision. They haven't subcontracted that decision out to an advisor. The advisor advises, as we all know, and you get all your advice from different people, different sources. You put that information, you take it into your cabinet, and you decide what the decision is. At the moment, we've abrogated that decision and given it over to an advisor. That's like saying, it is like saying, let's KPMG.
It's a technocracy.
Yeah.
It is. It's like having Deloitte or KPMG advising us on X, Y, Z, and then we say we're going to let Deloitte run that section of the Australian economy because that's what they advise us. No, the Treasurer does that, and then the Prime Minister and Cabinet put it through the House of Reps. It's then put through to the Senate. The bills are reread, and our laws are passed that way. At the moment, flu jabs, vaccinations, everything is being run by 6 medical officers. Our country is not that system. Our country is the leader makes decisions, on the advice of advisors.
Yep. Now, Debbie, you're a qualified nurse. Tell me more about those qualifications, just for a bit of context and perspective, because in your comments that we'll have straight after that.
Sure. I have a nursing degree, so I've worked in nursing, primarily specialist oncology nursing for a number of years, and now in this reproductive health education and research field, and a couple of degrees in adult education, which is the field I worked in prior to nursing.
So your Twitter bio says you're a clinical nurse consultant.
Clinical nurse consultant. So I have a private practice where I see private clients, and as part of that practice, I speak to people with kind of high prevalence mental health disorders, depression, anxiety, etc., and provide clinical supervision to practitioners who work with clients.
Right.
So that's my specialist field, to support practitioners who work with other clients.
Okay. So comment to us on the bioethics of coercing or even compulsorizing vaccination.
I have maybe a bit of a different view from the rest of the panel. I'm not sure. I had a discussion with someone the other day who talked about
that would be welcome, by the way.
Okay, good. Who talked about the fact that nursing homes were saying that if you haven't had a flu vaccination, you can't come into the nursing home to visit the elderly. Now, while I feel for people who may have that circumstance and can't do that, I certainly pointed out that as a nurse, I feel that I can and should be compelled to do everything to protect my patients. That does not mean it's compulsory for me to have a flu vaccination, but it may mean that if I want to work in a particular area of nursing with vulnerable people, one of the things I need to do is have a flu vaccination, just as I need to have a nursing degree or specialist qualifications and wear my seatbelt on the way to work to drive my car. I think that we look at the evidence, and the evidence is that vaccination has a greater good outcome for society. I'm pretty good at looking at evidence and looking at research and making those decisions, and that's how I do that.
So let me jump in here and say, let's hypothetically agree that there's an ethical case requiring healthcare workers working with highly vulnerable patients, such as nurses in aged care facilities, to take a sensible precaution like a flu vaccine. Let's say that's ethical for that to be a requirement of employment. Is it ethical still for a footballer to get a flu vaccination as a requirement of entry into a state or employment in their field of expertise?
For playing football.
Probably
football. Not a good person to ask about sport, because I'd be on the side of, what sport. But yeah, look, I don't know. These are not vulnerable people who are on the footy
field. Are you aware of
field.
any studies or research indicating high mortality rates among footballers from the flu?
I am not, no. And in fact, they're probably a low vulnerable population, low population, low in vulnerability in that regard.
Well, at least they were until they were locked in and forced to stop exercising and getting sunlight.
Yes, which is a whole other issue, isn't it? Yeah. So, I don't have again, I mean, my argument could be, well, if you want to play football and part of playing football means you have to do A, B and C. However, so this is a different discussion now. These are people who are already playing football at a particular level, who are now being compelled to do something in order to take a next step. And I don't know what I think about that.
If there was some evidence that a footballer having a flu shot meant that kept people safe from coronavirus, then you might, think that was a reasonable thing for the chief medical officer to stipulate. But I can't understand why this has, been overlaid with the restarting of NRL. It just seems strange.
Mm.
Yeah, it does seem like a step towards. I think you're a bit naive if you don't think of this as a step towards more authoritarian postures with regards to our health.
Dave, I think Steve made a really important point earlier about the National Cabinet. I've been uncomfortable with this National Cabinet right from the get-go. Happy to accept it in a time of urgency, but it has absolutely no constitutional basis at all. I think the Chief Medical Officer, Brendan Murphy, has done a stellar job. I think he is a brilliant man. He's communicated terrifically throughout this whole crisis. But I'm deeply uncomfortable when I see him, as I saw him on television last night, opining on behalf of the National Cabinet. He is not an elected official. He's there to advise elected people, as Steve rightly said. And I think this body should be wound up now that we are coming through the other side of this. This idea that we could have some sort of a kumbaya of, some new model of governance that includes, technocrats, as you said earlier. Well, look, if we're going to do that, let's have a constitutional convention and put it to the people and reshape our mode of governance. But let's not use this crisis as a form of trying to reshape the Federation. Yep,
totally agree. Gentlemen, just a quick, lady and gentlemen, let's have a look at your websites. So, Kurt, guys, viewers, kurtmahlburg.blog. That's KURTMAHLBURG, kurtmahlburg.com. One of the famous philosophers to go down in history from centuries from now, just because it's a name that's easily repeatable, I think. So that's Kurt's blog there, and he's on Twitter as well, K_Mahlburg, with all the cool surfy stuff going on. Where's that photo, Kurt?
That's actually in Milwaukee, where my beautiful American bride is from. So,
very nice.
The Kilah building,
Yeah, very cool. And we've got Debbie Garratt, DEBBIEGARRATT.com, with a whole lot of. Is that your home or your counselling studio photo or something, Debbie?
Yes, that is a table in my home.
And they're meant to be all peaceful, tranquil little statue things? Or you've just got a fascination with Asia?
Well, my husband and I have travelled very frequently to Asia, where we've supported some families. And so, yes, we do love it.
Yeah, awesome.
We won't be going very often in the future.
No, that's not happening again anytime soon. And Steve, where's your blog and Twitter account?
It'll never happen.
You're just found on Pellowe Talk.
That'll do.
And this man hiding here with censorship over his mouth is Lyle Shelton.
I need a web developer to give me a hand, Dave. If you know of anyone who's any good.
Better than blocking out your eyes, I guess. lyleshelton.com.au. And Debbie is also on Twitter at Debbie Garratt, RRTT. And so is Lyle. He is a concerned citizen, apparently doing sponsorship for Qantas. Or maybe it's just wishing for better years gone by when it wasn't so into corporate virtue signalling.
That's it.
Brilliant. Well, let's whip around the panel again and bring the overtime to a close. If anybody in the comments watching wants to throw anything in, now's a good time before we wrap it up. But we'll go Lyle, then Kurt, then Debbie, then Steve. Give us your final thoughts for the evening.
Well, Dave, I just think you're doing a great job bringing these panels together and this show, and I really hope it goes well, and I hope it knocks off the other program, which we won't mention, that happens on Monday nights. But yeah, good on you for doing this and bringing Conservatives together, and thanks for the opportunity to be part of it.
My pleasure.
And if I could just perhaps, my publisher would be upset if I didn't encourage people to go to connorcourtpublishing.com.au and pre-order. Oh, thank you, Dave. You are a professional. connorcourtpublishing.com.au, and anyone who orders before June 1 will get a personally signed copy, and we certainly appreciate your support, and I hope the book will be an inspiration to you and anyone you might want to give it to.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, and it's the incredible, successful production studio that I have here in the background with scores of staff. So
I've been there,
you.
Dave. I know how you make sausages.
That's right. Hey, I'm going to actually rebuild this entire back wall, that window behind me. I'm going to cover it in wood paneling. It's going to look absolutely amazeballs. Kurt Mahlburg, tell us your final thoughts for the evening, and feel free to just talk about some of the issues instead of the greatness of Pellowe Talk.
No, I mean, I very much appreciate being on the show as well, and I think we managed to cover a pretty amazing variety of topics. And one of the things I've really appreciated, and this is not obviously unique to this show, I think I'm seeing it a lot in the conservative movement, and that is the willingness to engage in a whole variety of opinions on certain subjects. I learned a lot from Debbie, particularly tonight, which, very different voice in the pro-life movement to what I've heard. But I've learnt a lot of things, and I think that that format, or the forum, for open dialogue and listening to opposing ideas is extremely healthy, and we need more of it. So thank you for providing that space tonight, Dave.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, Kurt. And Debbie.
Yeah, thank you. I do appreciate the opportunity to open up a broader discussion around the issues, particularly to do with abortion and adoption and others. And probably the main takeaway for me is my husband has already informed me I'll be subjected to a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie marathon over the coming days. So make sure you ask me that question next time.
Awesome. Okay, well, we will do that, and that'll be good for the one sponsored question of the evening. And my good friend Steve, wrap up your thoughts for the evening.
Well, thanks, Dave, again for having us. It's nice to see Lyle again and the other two people I haven't met before. I think just having a very balanced and very informative, open discussion amongst so many different people is really terrific. I think, Dave, since you started this, I've been able to get friends and expats from, I've just noted them down, United Arab Emirates, Oman, Saudi Arabia, that are getting news from home, views from home about all these different things, and of course friends and family that extend into the United Kingdom. So when you're starting to have an overreach into the Middle East and you're getting Australian and international news, I think the show is spreading its wings, and I think the diversification of guests keeps everyone very informed about alternative views, and that's what freedom of speech and freedom of thought allows. I'm just very glad that this is a show that allows other ideas to be seen and heard. I think it's doing a very good job, Dave.
Awesome. Well, thanks for spreading the word around the world, expats in particular, and thanks to the viewers and the Pellowe Talk partners who keep making this happen. The questions and comments are awesome. Matthew Patterson previously said before, Church and State needs a plug, so that's churchandstate.com.au, and that was a conference that I host annually. And at that conference, we basically do this, where we'll get a lot of really, really great first-class speakers and get them to instruct us on different issues. And it's very instructive. So if you've got some spare time at the moment, maybe you're not quite released from lockdown yet, or you're just genuinely interested in more education on more issues from a Christian worldview perspective. It is a specifically Christian conference. Head to churchandstate.com.au and follow the links, or go straight to /CAS20 CAS20, and there you'll be able to buy the videos for just $20, which is less than $1 each, because it was a 3-day conference. Or 2-day conference with some other tour stops as well. All the videos aren't quite up yet, but they're coming as soon as I can edit them and get them uploaded. We've got at least half of them up already, so there's plenty to watch and get you started. And for everybody who's already purchased it, appreciate your patience. Putting things like this together and doing more definitely means we need some staff happening. But speaking of what else is happening, next week's episode of Pellowe Talk Live has probably one of the most prolific social commentators in Australia, Bill Muhlenberg, joining us on the panel, along with Augusto Zimmerman a law professor, quite distinguished and knowledgeable, literally written the books on the histories of the Christian foundations of law in both England, America, and Australia. We also have Damien Tomlinson, formerly from the Townsville neck of Queensland, and now a commentator on Sky, as well as writing for the Courier Mail. We also have Evelyn Ray from Cauldron Pool, and Dr. Rachel Carling, another really great pro-life advocate, advocating for women as well as children, especially in New South Wales. So that's going to be a really great episode as well with those people. Make sure you're watching, subscribed, tuning in, sharing, and commenting. That's pretty much it. So once again, we've got 3 more comments there. Karen Emma says, church and state conferences are awesome, especially the pastor session. Yeah, that was really good this year. Peter Rees, great thoughts tonight. Thank you all. Hey, Peter, one of my old stomping grounds, Parks. And Septimus Kane, I love her comments. Yay, can't wait for Bill and Augusto. Well, thank you very much, everyone, and fare thee well, and we will see you in the comment section. Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Thanks,